got a lot going on. It's an off day, so we want to give him some time to do his thing. It's the one and only Eduardo, Eddie Encina, Ed in the yard. What's going on, buddy? How are you?
Hey, buddy. How we doing today?
Good, man. Good. What time did you get home last night? Late night?
No, not too late.
Not
Regular
too
time,
bad.
I think.
Yeah, because you didn't ask any questions in the post game. I was taking the heat last night.
It's
John
about time,
Cooper.
Jay.
I always ask post game interviews. I always ask post game questions, but I got like 6 in last night. It was my night.
Yeah, Cooper was a little salty at first, but as always, he the more you let him talk, the more he just has to let it loose. So, but yeah, it was nice just kind of watching it for a change.
Yeah,
instead of being immersed.
I know, right? Instead of you being the guy that had to, deal with all that jazz. What did you make of the start of that game last night, man? It just seemed like the Lightning I think that's the big, obviously, topic of conversation and point of contention for Bolts Nation out there is, you have an opportunity to win that game in regulation. You're in first place today if that happens, and then you lay a complete egg in the first 3.5 minutes going down 2-0.
Yeah, I think it was tough also because, I think this team, despite the, them losing the first 3 games against Toronto, that they felt that they had this was an opportunity to kind of write that narrative, a little bit, because a lot of those games were pretty early in the season. And then, it's tough because, even in the playoffs, you're not going to play perfect hockey, right? But you have to stop a couple things. One, you have to have decent starts, and you can't stop the snowball effect, right? So, the other night, last night, when you look at both of those goals, bad turnovers just kind of, end up in the back of the net, and all within three and change minutes, into the game, and you just can't have that. As Coop said, it was embarrassing, and especially given what was kind of on the line there, the opportunity that presented itself, the way that. I honestly don't think the Lightning played poorly over the road trip. I think that it was one of those ones where you could say that they played well for the most part and deserved a little bit more. You take away a couple periods, a couple turnovers, and it's probably a little bit better. But they ended up on the right way in New York. Power play got going. They did to the Rangers what Toronto kind of did to them in terms of making it snowball. So, but that's the kind of stuff that when you look at what can kill you in the postseason and what can kill you in the series, because the opportunities aren't going to be there, as much as they are in the regular season. And when you let those things kind of cave on you a little bit, it's a hard way to fight back. And we saw in the series last year with Florida, it felt like they were chasing a lot. And, when a goaltender's on, it's really tough. So I think there's a lot of disappointment in the room. I was actually surprised they scrapped practice today. But I do think that, as Coop said, they got in late the other night. That was a long road trip. I mean, you're going all over New York State, and there's and you kind of see the road ahead a little bit here, where once the playoffs start, you don't have those rest days. So maybe something like this is a little bit of a value to take a day like today off. I think they're scheduled to be off on Saturday after playing Detroit tomorrow too. So as much as we hear them talk a lot about the value of practices and stuff like that, I think right now, you want to be fresh. You want to fill the tank. You want to be ready for the postseason. I think you can look back on last game and they know what they did wrong. It's not an effort thing; it's an execution thing. So, you from that you can look at it's just as valuable to look at the tape as it is to be out there, especially at this point in the season, and trying to correct something like that by being on the ice. So but definitely an opportunity lost there, because I think they're in a much different space and feeling a lot better about themselves if they're able to pull that game out, even if it's an overtime. Obviously regulation would have been great because it puts them in first place, but even just to kind of come back from that bad start and be able to pull 2 points out of it would have made them feel a lot better about it.
So, as our number one viewer asked the question, how was the tour of New York State, buddy?
It was good. It was, a lot of different travel. Actually, it's funny. So, the whole reason that I went up to Syracuse was because I had banked a JetBlue flight that I think last year, there was a game in Boston that I got sick and I didn't go. So I banked that flight, and we do this a lot. It's like, you bank the
Right.
flights and you figure out, how to use them later. And I had to use it by like, or schedule it by like January something. So
Mm-hmm.
in January, I looked and I was like, okay, look at the schedule and like, where's a place I can go? And there really anything didn't work out because JetBlue only fly, like it's really like Boston, New York,
Yeah.
places like that they're direct. And I realized that there was uh, a direct flight from Orlando to Syracuse,
Oh.
and so it was pretty cheap. I could have used you just slotted in there, no cost or anything like that. Um, so the trip started driving to Orlando to take a direct flight to Syracuse. Then from Syracuse, a 3.5 hour bus ride to Buffalo, and then flying across back to New York, and then obviously coming home. So it was a lot of travel. It felt like sometimes you were on in airports or bus stations or more than necessarily the arena itself or even your hotel room. But I mean, it's always you find a lot of stuff on the road when you're on the road and everything like that. So it's always valuable to be there, and especially in time like that. Everyone's talking about the Isaac Howard stuff, and I think some of that stuff was changing, at least incrementally, day to day with some of that stuff. So it was good to be around the team in times like that too. So, and obviously just, I always treat stuff like this where it's like, it's the most valuable to be around the team, down the stretch and obviously in the
Yeah.
postseason, because that's when people, everyone's kind of paying attention, maybe more so than game 46 in, you know, in,
In
in
Winnipeg.
Carolina or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
All right, so let's get into that real quick before we get back to the team. What was your initial thought and takeaway when the news came out yesterday that there's a possibility that Isaac Howard will be, a possibility that he could go back to Michigan State and not join the Lightning? I've been saying that I think it's a leverage play. I think we had an idea that it was going to be tough when it came to the salary cap, and if it was going to happen, it was probably going to happen maybe in the last 2 regular season games. But it seems like a leverage play from Isaac Howard and his representatives. I don't see how, after what he did at Michigan State, he would want to go back to the Spartans. Right? What is your entire take on this situation, and if there's any other new information that you've heard or seen?
yeah, no, I agree with that sentiment. I think that, in these kind of negotiations, it's, there's only certain times when a player really kind of has leverage. And this is kind of one of them, because it's not about the money, right? It's about, because the entry level contract is what it is. It's about, him wanting to turn pro. And, I'm sure that the notion of him wanting to be on the NHL roster plays a significant part of it too. And then, like I said, the Lightning, they don't have the cap space right now.
Right.
And I think this is kind of a leverage to try to force their hand. I think we said yesterday is like, make it work, figure it out. Like, you guys can, you guys are the master capologists of the NHL. Like, you can't figure out a way to figure out how to put Isaac Howard on this team. So I think it's definitely a leverage play at this point, because, I think the Lightning see this as a definitely not a closing of a book by any means, this news, because it can change at any time. And I think I've said this to you many times, is, they work on this 365 days a year, and I think they wake up today not closing a book on Isaac Howard, but just kind of saying, okay, is there a way, or is this something we evaluate later, we look at
Right.
down the stretch. I mean, but I do know that, like I said before, like, there was a lot of effort into getting him here and to getting him signed, because I do think that both sides did agree that was him turning pro was in everyone's best interest. Now, where he began, when he began, stuff like that, maybe there was some, as Elliot Freeman said, maybe they weren't simpatico on some of that stuff. But again, like, and again, I think the big question now is if the Lightning do kind of see an issue here and say, okay, like, maybe this isn't going to be as easy as we thought it would be. Is, do you now have to consider, at least trying to gauge a market here, in terms of, there's still plenty of time to sign him. There's no doubt about that. But again, you want to have a guy kind of under your control at this point in terms of his development. Guys, with Isaac, he was drafted in 2012, 2022, and they've had their arms around him for several years in terms of like development camps and their skating coaches going to Michigan State and working with them and everything like that. And but there's no doubt that him working and him playing at Michigan State under his former, developmental coach, Adam Nightingale's helped him by leaps and bounds.
Right.
And he might be a better player when the year of hockey if for some reason that comes to actually fruition. But and then it gives him absolute leverage, a year from now when the Lightning actually feel a ton of pressure. And
do you think it gets to that, Ed?
I for some again, like there's some things in this that surprise me a little bit, but I don't think it gets to that point.
I don't think so either. I don't see how he goes back to Michigan State after being a Hobie Baker finalist. It was vocal. I mean, he's vocal. He wants to come up here, and the Lightning putting out all the stuff on social media, right? It seems like they want to make it happen. So, I mean, if it doesn't happen and he goes back to Michigan State, like I think you just, I think you write the book and I think he's out of here and you look to move him. But I don't see that as something that Julian and Darch and the entire crew want to do. They want to find a way to get this guy with the team sooner rather than later, but it's got to come at the right time and under the right parameters. No?
Right, for sure. And I think that's, again, I think that they have by far not closed the book on this situation. And, maybe calmer heads prevail in a matter of days, weeks, whatever it is, but everything I've gathered is that Isaac Howard has appreciated everything the Lightning have given him so far, and vice versa, and it would just, I think there are the makings here of it being kind of a little getting ugly here, but I think at the end of the day, everyone wants kind of the same thing, and it's just a process, and the Lightning are a team that's pretty stubborn in their process, but it's also a process that continuously works, whether it's with with a lot of the guys who they've drafted and signed to these, ECALCs that start the following year, so don't burn a year and stuff like that. The difference here obviously is that Isaac Howard is a player that of the caliber that they haven't had in this organization in quite a while. They acquired one in Connor Geekie over the summer, but even Geekie, like the hype train on Isaac Howard has been running for 3 years since he, walked down the steps in Montreal and with his turtleneck and his, gold chain and said he was the best dressed guy in the room, and so since then we've seen him only help that kind of stature and in the sense of, being this clutch player who can score, who's exciting to watch, and everyone wants to watch, whether that was at World Juniors a couple years or last summer when he, basically leads Team USA to a gold medal in Sweden and, scores 2 games in the final, to, I think everyone's seen the clip of him in double overtime and in the Big Ten tournament in Michigan State a couple weeks ago, leading the Spartans to a conference, tournament championship there. I mean, this guy is different. There's no doubt about it. He has a dynamic way of playing, and he has a swagger about him that few kids his age can legitimately pull off. But there's care that comes with that when you're injecting a guy like that into an organization, into an NHL room, into everything. And I honestly think if Isaac Howard said, hey, just if Isaac Howard was okay with them, hey, just go down to Syracuse for a couple of days, let's get your arms around you. Let's see where you're at right now after playing the 26 game college season at the age of 20, just turning 21, where you're at, because I do think that as much as this is becoming like, who's right and who's wrong, that the Lightning don't want to put Isaac Howard in a situation where he won't succeed initially. That's something that's where Connor Geekie came down, and Connor Geekie had the benefit of, no one, I don't think you would have a hard time finding anyone in that organization who had Connor Geekie labeled for the opening right roster when he came into camp. But he had 3 weeks of being able to convince everyone, and that's convincing everyone on the ice, convincing everyone off the ice. And, even then, it was kind of a surprise that he did make the team. And, but I think at that point they thought, hey, we're putting him in the situation to succeed as a 21-year-old kid who has had very little experience outside of juniors. And, I think that's the other thing. I mean, that's the other thing too here. I mean, it's a similar situation. Is I think the Lightning don't want to put. They want to know that this is a guy who, and can he help this team right now? I'm sure he can, right? But I think the Lightning want to be absolutely positive of that before they, you know, make him a promise that he'll be on an NHL roster tomorrow. So I think, it's by far not done. I think there's a little bit of like, I think all of this is kind of coming from Ike's camp too, obviously, but yeah, I don't think the Lightning have given up on this by any means. And like I said, knowing how hard these guys work to make it work, I think that, like I said, the sides might not be talking today, this morning, but I do think that, the discussions have absolutely not, finished as we sit here right now.
Right. One thing I noticed from the game last night, and this is part of the reason why I brought this up to you guys, months ago, was that secondary scoring, right? The second and third lines. I think that's, especially on the road, I think it dries up a little bit. I get worried that the team is a little bit too top heavy. But that's the reason why you go out and get Yanni Gourde and Oliver Bjorkstrand. I mean, Yanni's not a guy that's going to, he's only scored one goal since he's gotten traded, but we know what his impact was before he got traded, or before he got, went to Seattle, and now after. But I love what I saw from Oliver Bjorkstrand last night, man. I thought he was one of the guys that really showed. I feel like he played fast last night. There was one play where he stick handled through Toronto and used his foot, got the puck back on the stick, was able to get it to Kucherov. You see that they're really, I just see a guy growing, right? I see a guy flourishing. And, you see that a lot in sports with young players, and they finally blossom and bloom. But this guy is no spring chicken, right? He's a veteran, but he's signed for the team next year. We've seen what he's able to do, especially in the postseason. But what do you see? Did you see some of those same things? Have you seen it the last couple of games? But did you see it last night as well? Because, I mean, you look at that and you go, man, everybody comes back. Gensel comes back, and you have all five guys on the power play. And just even having him 5-on-5, I think you're really starting to see the Oliver Bjorkstrand that Julian Breezeball brought into the Bolts.
Right. I think that the other thing that's tough for a player coming in is it's not just learning how to play with a new team. It's learning how to play with new teammates and different teammates, you know? And I think that they did do a good job of putting him with Yanni for the most part, as he's been here, give him something that's comfortable, give him something that, works. I do think that they try him on the power play initially and on that first team on the left wing. And I think he kind of deferred a little bit to some of the other guys. And I think that's natural. Darren Radish did it, when he was on there. It's like, you want to get, you hear it all the time from young players. I heard from Connor Geeky when I talked to him about playing on the Cirelli line, last week. It's like you play with great players, you want to get the puck in their hands, right? And you don't really think about, and Connor Geeky's talking about how, the best thing about being in Syracuse is that he's a guy who is at his best when he has the puck on a stick. And, in Syracuse, that's what he's doing. He probably wouldn't have the puck on a stick as much if they tried to keep forcing him here, and so, and that gives you the confidence, that gives you your touch, that gives you your scoring. You're looking for space, all that stuff. So, and it's no different than a guy like Bjorkstrand. Obviously, he's a proven scorer. He's a proven talent. He's been around the block. He's killed the Lightning in the playoffs before. And, now I think you're just finding with time that he's just getting comfortable. And I love him. I absolutely love him in the spot that they have him at right now in the power play, in that bumper spot. But also the kind of what they're doing on the power play now, which is, Braden Point talked about this the other night in New York, is, that there's times when that power play gets stagnant. They sit in their spots and they just pass the puck around and they're all just waiting for the perfect shot, right? But now what you're seeing, Points moving from the bumper out to the wing. Gensel moves around anyway because he's back in that net front. He's all over the place, But you see Cooch moving from, we know how much he likes to be in the half wall, but we also know how much he loves to be down below the circle on the right side. That lower circle part where you can really see everyone from his vantage. But you're starting to see him move kind of towards the up the top. And when you have the best thing about the Lightning power play is honestly the perception of it, right? There's so many weapons that you have to pick your poison. You haven't talked about Victor Hedman, who scored on the power play yesterday because they basically gave him a ton of space and he just walked into the top of the slot and just probably had one of the best open looks all night. And I know they had a a lot of looks last night because they missed the net a lot, but and had a lot of shots blocked. But he had a pretty good one. The expected goal on that shot is pretty high that he scored on. So when you have the guys moving and you have the kind of skill that those guys have, and then they start performing, like that's how this power play becomes really dangerous. And that's how it's become dangerous for years. I mean, if anything, the tough part has been that on that left circle, you always had Steven Stamkos, and you always had to account for him, right?
Right.
And when he was gone, maybe that put a little bit more, the team to concentrate towards the other guys. But I do like, Bjorkstrand in there because he's got a hard shot. He gets it off quick, and that's what you need in that position, right? But also with the notion that he can move, like him and Point can pretty much move out.
I like
I
that.
love bringing Point on the wing because him in space, there's not many better guys in. So you almost want the puck on his stick out there so he can kind of do some stuff versus in the bumper where it's like basically catch and shoot for all.
Even though he's been so great at it the last 5 years, right. I'm with you, man. Right. But I like the ability to switch because I've been saying that for years, Ed. Like I love the power play, but I think the reason why they got by, it's not because of some like magic formula. It's just because you have the greatest passer in this generation and the guy who's got the second best slap shot in this generation, and Steven Stamkos behind Ovechkin. So, I mean, you can get away with a lot of stuff. You also have Victor Hedman, who's as tall as he is. So now with more player movement, instead of just relying on puck movement, you have a lot of success, which I'm with you 100%. I think it makes a lot of sense. Look at what Sean Liston's saying. Jay, does Ed owe you a favor a la Paul Heyman, CM Punk, and now Seth Rollins? Hashtag burn it down. Hashtag Lampoys. Hashtag great pod. Yeah, man. I love that. We got a big next week. We're going to do a big WrestleMania thing too. I'm still trying to figure out what we're going to do with that, but we need a big WrestleMania segment with you and Corey and David Chili and Matt Matera. We're going to do like a big fatal 5-way. I want to answer this question too. Once you're done with the serious stuff, I read the concessionaire will change. Nobody's ever put concessionaire on the Jay Recher podcast before. Both of you, what's the best concession food you've had at any sporting arena / stadium that you wish was at Amalie? I don't go to many games now as a fan, so it's tough to answer that question. Trying to think, man.
That's a tough one.
Because we don't go to games like that, We're eating press box food. We're eating honestly, 16 spring rolls.
One of your 16 dry cardboardy spring rolls
with the red sauce.
Looking forward to new concessionaire. Delaware North's been their concessionaire for quite a while, and I think the new one, Oakview Group, I think is her name, is I think they're looking at that as more of a not just a concessionaire, but just kind of a I guess the word would be hospitality. The way that they would probably want to put it is like, how do you use, what you offer your fans in terms of concessions and resources and stuff like that makes the experience better. And
media dining.
I was even saying I think honestly this is the Jay, there. Sorry.
Yeah, we got you.
I think that this is actually one of the first kind of things that we've seen that maybe the new ownership may have their kind of fingerprints on, which is good because I do know from just hearing around is that they've really kind of come in here and really listened to like, hey, what's good and what maybe needs to improve here. So, and that's not any disrespect to Delaware North. I mean, they're a well-known concessionaire company, but I think this is one of those things. To answer that question, that I think of it like, this is going to sound funny, but like, I love arena and ballpark sushi.
Really?
And actually Madison Square Garden. So when we have like when we're on the road, like most places have a food room, basically like a media dining area.
But you get the voucher.
Madison Square Garden is one of the few that actually gives you a voucher. They give you like a $25 voucher, and you can go anywhere in the arena and get stuff. And most of the times, it's a little bit of a walk from the hall, but there's a sushi place there that has sashimi. It has California rolls, everything that's really good. And
nice.
It's better than like chicken tenders and fries, which is basically what like most things are. But also Seattle has really good sushi. I remember that at Safeco Field for baseball. But the best food room, the best media dining room and I brag about this all the time, in the NHL, I believe, is Detroit.
Yeah, I
And
heard that.
at Little Caesars Arena. And yes, they do have like a station there that has Little Caesars pizza and wings,
That's great.
but they have it all. Like it's like there's this area with like you want the salad and like the meatloaf or something like that. There's a thing where it's like a prime rib or like some kind of like steak thing and roasted chicken. And so if you want like the home cooked meal, you got it there. And it's just a huge big long line. Obviously, it's like I think probably Detroit's one of the newer arenas too in the league. Might be the newest one in the league. So obviously that's a big part of it too. But everyone who I know, who we talk about, like when we talk about this stuff about best rooms and food rooms in the league, I think Detroit stands out above the rest. And
what's the worst?
I love games in Detroit. They've got a gondola there that like it's a great vantage point. It's a little high, but like you can see everything directly onto the ice. It's a great building. But yeah, I would say to answer your question, food like food in the arena, probably like sushi, something like that. But and then like I said, the food room in Detroit's really, really, really good.
What's the worst? Probably the Panthers, right?
Oh, yeah, Panthers is great.
Panthers is a rough one, man.
It's a rough one. It's kind of yeah, it's that one's a rough one. Let me try to think if there's another one.
I'm trying to think of Vegas. I'm trying to remember eating at Vegas.
Carolina is actually like the food is good, but you always got to count on barbecue.
Yeah,
right?
Okay.
Like it's like you're gonna walk in there, you're like, all right, I'm gonna have Carolina barbecue and
right.
some mashed potatoes. So like there's not the
high floor. There's a high floor. High floor.
Yeah. But
I like that.
I mean, I'm not too picky. Like give me a box of popcorn and a cup of coffee, and I'm okay for the game. So
you got that right. Sean Liston says Dirty Dom prefers those chicken tendies you just tressed. Yeah, you got that right, Sean. And before I let you go, man, what do you got right now up on TampaBay.com/sports here in the Tampa Bay Times?
Yeah, so still getting some good clicks from the story I did on from Syracuse, just kind of talking about the how in different ways Connor Geeky and Connor Sheary handled the demotion down to Syracuse, and how both of them are really playing well and have kind of found their game, and they're a big reason why Syracuse is kind of fighting for a playoff spot down there. Julian actually told me something the other day. He said that the Lightning are one of two teams that could, and actually they'll be the two teams because the other team is Boston, that for 8 straight years make the playoffs for their NHL team and their AHL team.
Wow.
So, and that's when we talk about the Isaac Howard stuff, that's something they're really proud of. You know what I mean? So, I mean, that kind of goes to show how much there is that process, and even for everyone, and so, but going down to Syria, I know we talked to you about this last week, it was just really cool just seeing the process down there and seeing how, really connected it is. And I've got some other stuff coming on some of that stuff, because I got some good color and good interviews on that. Just, tomorrow, or what I'm working on actually right now is just kind of the 4 games left, the 4 big things you really need to know going in, because, right now, even after last night, the schedule is really in the Lightning's favor. 3 of the 4 opponents are going to come to all 3 home opponents are going to come to Amalie Arena coming off back-to-backs. So, and obviously that didn't help them last night because Toronto was on a back-to-back, but, conceivably speaking, you got some tired legs, backup goaltending, whatever it is, you should be able to jump on that. And that's stuff that's important in the playoffs, whether it's, Detroit, Buffalo, the Panthers, obviously, and just some other things to talk about. Some of the stuff we were talking about, the power play, and why that's important right now is because we've seen kind of this evolution of the power play, good and bad throughout the season. We're still seeing Kucherov on that left side every once in a while, which I think is just kind of like a, misdirection play almost,
right.
Kind of like, all right, what are they doing now kind of thing. But, it works sometimes, because of just for that effect. So just kind of breaking down some of the things that, are important down the stretch here, and probably going a little bit into Vasilevsky and his thing. I talked to Vasi in Buffalo when he had a day off, and he's really cool. He actually talked a lot about, what it's been like this year. He gave a lot of kudos to the way that guys have played in front of him defensively this year. It's great hearing a goaltender's perspective on that. I know that Vasi doesn't talk a super amount, but he's really, he's really good on talking about like what he's seen from the guys in front of him this year. And again, I think from that story you'll get a lot of like how everyone kind of continues to give Ryan McDonough his well-deserved flowers for kind of being a big part of that. So we'll have a Vastly story coming up into the postseason. And then just, round this thing out and get ready for whoever they're going to play, right?
Yeah, buddy. I'm ready to go down to South Florida, buddy. Bill Kempers. We are ready to go, my friend. Can't wait.
Bo Kempers, Flanagan's. We got tons of places down there.
We're ready to go, man. I'm hungry right now just thinking about it. I'm about to go get me some grub as we speak. Eddie in the Yard. Make sure you go subscribe to the Tampa Bay Times today. Now's the time, guys. With baseball just starting up, we see so many great things with USF, but right now, this lightning coverage, when Ed's traveling on the road, when we're there, you want to make sure that you have all of these stories at your fingertips, whether it's digitally or whether it's in your hands. So again, subscribe to the Tampa Bay Times today. Support local. I cannot say that enough. Eddie in the Yard on Twitter/X. And you can check them out tomorrow at Amalie Arena. The boys are back in action against the Red Wings. Weird games. Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. That's just the way it is. We're getting closer.
Don't even know what day of the week it is.
I don't even. That's what we said last night. Is it Monday? It's Tuesday. Nope, we're wrong. It was Wednesday last night. All jacked up. Ed, appreciate you, brother. See you tomorrow. Talk to you next week.
All right, Jay. Thanks for having me, buddy. Talk to you later.
Thanks, pal.